for the members of the class of 2005, or perhaps those from the 60s. April 20th turns out to be a key date at which those kids gather on Farrand Field and smoke something they're not supposed to smoke. And their idea is there are too many of us for the police to arrest. You can't arrest us all. The police said, you're right, but we can take pictures of you all and then put them on the web at $50 a pop for who can tell us who this person is. Now, the reaction is somewhat interesting because it is the classic wanted poster. It's just somehow, but you know, the cat is only supposed to be this big relative to the mouse. It's fair to have a cat, it's fair to have a mouse, but when it gets too easy for the cat, somehow we object, at least if it's over something like this. And sure enough, we've now seen version 2.0 from 2009. This is a real website translated from the Farsi that the government put up in Iran after the disputed elections for which there were protests. And here, there's a bunch of people they can't identify for which they have importuned the public to name who they are. Now, of course, there's a ceiling on how effective this can be, because the people most likely to know who they are probably the least likely to want to turn them in because they know what's going to happen. So then I got to thinking, how could we turn this, hypothetically, into a Mechanical Turk task? We can't put it out and say, we'll give you 5 cents if you know who this person is, because in Topeka or Beijing or Bangalore, they're not going to know who it is. But if you're the government of Iran, you could just take some of your 57 million ID card photos, put them on one side, have the protester you're trying to identify on the left, and just lather, rinse, repeat. Do a task where you say, do you see the person here in any of the photos here? And I just did a quick kind of back-of-the-envelope spreadsheet on it and found that basically for under $17,000, roughly, you can identify any arbitrary person in a population of 57 million. Yeah, kind of weird. So here comes the bookended hypothetical, which I suppose you have already anticipated. It's a Saturday morning. Here's what the kid is doing. Having a great time. How many people have a problem with that? More. How many people do not have a problem with this? How many people are bemused? All right, still a good number of bemused people, but we pulled a number of people over into the have a problem with that side. And of course, like a good law school hypothetical, it's pretty much pulling at every possible string it can. It's kids, it's PBS, it's protesters. But that's an example, I think, of where you can see it happening, where you can see the market being created. There really is an invisible hand that will push to make it so without any other intervention. Another set of worries. This is a real Mechanical Turk task where you are asked to review a website called natmedtalk.com on your blog. And you have to have a very real blog, and if you do, you review the site, you include a link, you can't disclose that this is a paid review, and then you'll be paid $2. And of course, it's the NatMedTalk people wanting to salt the web with good reviews of its site. Now, it doesn't actually demand that you write a good review, but an odd feature of Mechanical Turk is that payment is utterly at the discretion of the seeker. So if they don't like what you do, they just don't pay you. And what are you going to do, litigate it over 3 cents? You could be earning 3 cents 10 seconds later by not litigating and just doing another task. So I don't know, maybe somebody could say class action, in which case there's a very usable idea coming out of the lunch for somebody here. Here's another example, which is a little clearer about wanting a good review. Write a 5 out of 5 review for a product on a website. Write as if you own the product and are using it. Tell a story of why you bought it and how you are using it. And you will then earn, I think this was a 50-cent or $1 hit. Now, this was a real one. It turned out it was for Amazon.com, for a product there, which is kind of funny that here's one part of Amazon subverting another. And it leaked onto one of the technological bulletin boards, onto Slashdot. So you ended up with the Slashdotters all rushing to the website to leave 1-star reviews, the Turkers all loyally leaving 5-star reviews. Nobody had bought the product at all. Now, I don't know how worried this makes you, the fact that any of these rating schemes, here's another called Dig, where you rate stuff that you like, can be subverted, and there are now marketplaces in this. Here is a website called subvertandprofit.com, and you can go there and just buy any number of digs or thumbs up or Facebook likes that you want, not approved by the respective sites. This is an intermediary who takes half the money and gives the other half to the public out there that's already in the business of digging things or liking things, and just gives them 50 cents in order to do that. Now, you might say again, hey, I don't trust what I see online anyway, so who cares? My thought, and originally hypothetical, was how long before this gets out of the virtual world and into the real world? So there's classic lobbying campaigns, this one for the European Parliament, where we importune people to believe what we believe and then write their representative who will respond to enough people genuinely pressuring them to do something, one thing or another. So my worry was, well, what happens when you start using these systems to just pay people to lobby in the real world? It turns out this is no longer hypothetical. Some of you may have heard of GetHealthReformRight.org, one of the insurance-funded organizations. I don't know if you'd call it grassroots or AstroTurf, but one of the organizations impaneled to fight healthcare reform. And they just did the usual thing, trying to get people to agree with them and then write their member of Congress. But then they took it a step further. They went into a game called Farmville, which is wildly popular, has tens of millions of players around the world. And they actually paid Farmville people in virtual crops in order to lobby their real-world members of Congress. And that's the kind of thing for which the only thing that would make it a more perfect textbook hypothetical would be if this had been over the Farm Bill. So you'd have people getting paid virtual crops to argue against real crop subsidies. Somehow that would just be a perfect textbook example. This is the kind of thing that starts to make me extremely worried, because the end point of it is, if you don't like something, you're upset with the Sheraton commander for some reason. I don't know, maybe you're the Harvard Square Hotel. You go online, within 20 minutes and a few clicks and a small check, you can have a flash mob of protesters waving signs that you have already specified, arguing against the Sheraton commander and driving away business. And it's very difficult to know whether they are speaking from the heart or from the purse when they come and do that. Again, a great example of an extremely efficient market that can be leading to real trouble. So that's why I look at this original experiment from Casey Kinzer, and I say, it's so amazing what you can get people to do, but I also see the other side to it and start to worry about what you can get people enlisted to do without them even realizing the mosaic that they are creating. Now, for every good, that might mean a bad. For every bad, a good. This is a website set up by a guy named Ben Rigby from a group called The Extraordinaries. The Extraordinaries is like Mechanical Turk, but for nonprofits. If you're a nonprofit organization and you have small tasks you want help with, you can put it out for free, and people help you because they want to help out a nonprofit, and they are called The Extraordinaries. He actually was talking to me, and I was telling him about the Iranian election hypothetical with Mechanical Turk to identify protesters, and when the Haiti earthquake hit, he turned it around. And he actually created a site that people could go to submit a photo of somebody missing from the earthquake. He then got a feed of images taken after the earthquake and asked anybody to sort through the images and see if they could find a match. He got tens of thousands of people to actually undergo this exercise at the site and identified over 20 leads from pictures of missing people that had been pictured as being found at some point after the earthquake. So that's kind of a hopeful sense of things. And then I kind of end with this wonderfully ambiguous Mechanical Turk task. You are to do something kind and then take a photo of it. And it's pictured here by this oddly configured kind machine. People go in this funnel, gears process them, and hearts come out the other side. Again, I just don't know what it is about the metaphors in this space that they have to be so lurid. But in the meantime, the actual task is that you are supposed to do something nice in the world. Just go and be friendly, take a photo of it, tell a story, and you will get 50 cents. And people go out into the world and do this. And you realize we have at last created a processor that converts money into love. Who knew you could do this? And it's like, all right, like our work is done. Let's just call it a century. And then on the other hand, you're like, the next time somebody does something nice for me, are they being nice or are they going around the corner to collect their points? It's kind of a weird thing that suddenly everything is able to be turned into points. And it's that ambiguity that I think we ought to be working our way through and figuring out what kind of world is the world we want to see built with these new technologies and how we might be able to sway, regulate, otherwise see that world come about. Thank you very much. Do we have time for a couple questions? So I think we have some time for questions and reactions before we break. There are microphones ready to roam the room. There's one here from our friend at George Washington University.
How much of this is about points and how much is actually cash? How much are people actually paying people to do this or just game money?
The question was, how much is this points versus cash? And right now, there are a ton of parallel experiments going on in both. And the discoveries, this is a lot of work on motivation, and there are people here like Yochai Benkler working on cooperation and motivation. And they've even come up with a vernacular of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. What you do because it makes you feel good versus what you do because somebody's writing you a check to do it. And they have found that there are some amazingly powerful hybrids where people can be enlisted a little intrinsically, but then stick around for intrinsic reasons. Or the other way around. They come because they believe in it, but then they start getting a cash flow, and then they depend on it. I think it's too early to tell which will be the right formula. But in Silicon Valley right now, a lot of the talk is about a phenomenon they call gamification, where they find that turning almost anything into a game where you score points or lose points, even if the points are merely just glory and competitive, turns out to alone be a huge motivator. Now, whether people, when they find that their points are helping somebody else out epiphenomenally, whether or not they still want to see that take place is a good question. But so far, they don't seem to mind. And if you think about some of the sites, if you were picking a hotel, you might have used TripAdvisor or Yelp or something. That's an example of businesses whose worth is entirely premised on the goodwill and labor of unaffiliated people around the world who submit reviews. And they do it either because they want to do it, or you can be designated Yelp elite if you leave enough, and you become a docent on Yelp, and you see yourself as sort of working for the man, but still, it's fun. Other comments, questions, reactions? Over here? Yes, right over there?
Like a lot of people, I've got a blog. It's about wine. It's read mostly by my mother. But
How much do you pay her?
So increasingly, the hits that I get every day, I check, to see, come from all over the United States, but they're people that stay 0.00 seconds, so they're not reading it. So
Yes.
What's with this?
Well, if somebody's staying for 0.0 seconds, chances are good it's a so-called bot or robot. And it turns out that a lot of the entities crawling around the web are robots, either for perfectly good purposes. Google sends its robot around continuously so that it can update its index so we know what's where. And it also turns out that a lot of the current internet economy is premised on banner advertising and other displays for which sometimes merely exposing an eyeball to it creates a money flow. Somebody looks at the ad, the person chartering the ad has to pay for that. And sometimes, this is the Google model, if they click through, if they actually generate a click on the ad because they're interested, that generates money flow. And that will sometimes mean people send out robots in order to click on stuff in order to get money flow going in their direction. Because Google, in turn, has affiliates. On your wine site, you could put up so-called AdWords, and if people end up clicking on the ads for the wine, Google shares the money with you. That gives you an interest. If you weren't the upstanding person that we know you to be, you would click on the ads and Google would just start paying you for your own eyeballs. So that's a lot of what can account for this. But there's also, I almost think of it like in physics, they have dark energy and dark matter. And I was actually told by a cosmologist that they call it dark energy because they wanted funding from the Department of Energy. So, otherwise, they're not exactly sure what the stuff is. But there's sort of this dark energy out there on the web where whenever you try to do research and gather even basic demographics, like how many people are using the internet right now, which would be a trivial question for a CompuServe of the earlier era to answer. How many subscribers do you have? Or for Verizon to tell you how many people they have on their mobile phone network or on their landline. It's so difficult to answer from the internet because we don't even know who's a robot and who's not. And that's why I can only give you a part